Hello again, everyone, or no one watching right now. Gordon Causey, aka also known as Gordy Canuck on Twitter. 11:30 p.m. Sunday, the 26th of June, for another 30 minutes, and then it'll be Monday, the 27th. I wanted to talk tonight about something I touched on yesterday, and that's the Roe versus Wade ruling that came out of the United States Supreme Court. And I made a mistake yesterday, although I qualified it. I said I wasn't sure. I thought that decision, that seminal decision, Roe versus Wade, in basically establishing the constitutional right to a woman to have an abortion in the United States. That ruling, I said yesterday, I thought it was 1971. I checked today. In point of fact, it was 1973. So it wasn't far off. It was the early 70s. But regardless, I'm a Canadian. And so what that ruling had, the impact of that ruling on Canada is zilch, nero, nothing. It has absolutely no legal bearing on Canada whatsoever. But regardless of that fact, regardless that it has no impact here, from a legal in a legal context, it has no bearing. It still is having an impact, and I think the biggest impact that it is having is that it has Canadians now talking about abortion to a far greater degree than we have seen in a very long time. I think you'd have to go back to before 2015. Certainly we're discussing it more than we have for the last 6, 7, 8 years. And that's if you're on the pro-choice side of the debate. That's not a good thing, because right now the pro-choice side has everything exactly the way they want it. There are absolutely no restrictions on abortion in Canada whatsoever. In Canada, an abortion is legal at any time during pregnancy and for any reason. And all this can be verified. I'm not going to provide any links. If you're sufficiently interested, you can check it out yourself. There's plenty of information out there. But that is simply reality. And in point of fact, in 2009, so more than 10 years ago, 13 or so years ago, there's a pro-life advocacy group called Signal Hill, and they commissioned Angus Reid, a polling firm, to conduct a survey of Canadians. And they wanted to find out how many Canadians are actually aware of the fact that abortion in Canada is 100% perfectly legal. And again, at any point during pregnancy, from the beginning right up to the end, and for any reason whatsoever. And what their polling showed is that 92% of Canadians were unaware of that fact. Most Canadians, the overwhelming majority of Canadians, believed at that time, and I don't think it would be that much different now, believed that there were restrictions in place. I still meet people all the time who operate under the assumption that there are restrictions, that once you get to 24 weeks, 26 weeks, 30 weeks, that there's a legal framework, and there isn't. There is a question there, in terms of the abortion debate. There's two aspects to it. There's the legal side, and then there's the access side. And there was a story recently out of Quebec within the last few years where someone in their 30 plus weeks into a pregnancy, tests had determined that the unborn child, while healthy, would have abnormalities, and none of the articles specified what these abnormalities were. At any rate, she had an abortion done at a Montreal area hospital, and they had an ethical board that reviewed her request, and it was denied. And then she was able to find an alternative hospital that was willing to perform the procedure, and it was done at something like 35 or 36 weeks. And it created quite a firestorm at the time on both sides of the debate. Pro-choice advocates were angered that the Montreal area hospital had declined to perform the procedure, and pro-life advocates were angry that another hospital agreed to perform the procedure. So you've got, it is such a contentious issue. Now, there was a point I wanted to bring up with relation to sex selection. And this is something that came out again. The Canadian Medical Association did a study, and they wanted to see if abortion was being used to choose the sex of a child. That is to say, go in for the ultrasound. The ultrasound determines that the sex of the unborn child is female, and the family desires a male. And so abortion could be chosen for that reason. And in Canada, that's illegal. There's nothing to stop it. Access may be a question. You simply have to be able to find a doctor willing to, or a clinic or an outlet where there are individuals willing to perform the procedure, but there's no legal barrier to it whatsoever. And what the Canadian Medical Association study did is they looked within certain communities where it is believed that male children are favored over female. And so what they did is they looked at families where there was already a girl born and where a second child was being born. How often should the second child be a boy? How often should it be a girl? Across a wide swath, it should be about roughly 50-50. And yet they found that within certain communities, believed to prefer boys over girls, that second children born were disproportionately male. And so they published a paper and said this provided an indication that abortion could very well be being used to get rid of female girl. A family doesn't want another girl, so they get rid of it and try again for a boy, and rinse and repeat. I guess if it's another girl, well, get rid of that one. Keep going until you find a boy, or until you get a boy. And these are the areas that make this such a difficult issue, especially when Canadians are not even aware of the fact that all of this is perfectly permissible. If we're ignorant of the law, then people operate under the assumption that, oh, well, that doesn't happen. Well, it does. Now, pro-choice advocates will make the point that late-term abortions are very rare, and I won't dispute that. It's very rare. But what's interesting, what I find interesting, it comes down at the end of the day to at what point is a human being a human being? Right now, currently under Canadian law, a human being is not a human being until that unborn child is fully emerged alive from the birth canal. At that point, now that baby has recognition under Canadian law. An unborn child, minutes before, hours before, days before being born, has less protection, has zero protection. Dogs and cats, puppies and kittens have more protection. As a matter of fact, a corpse has more rights under Canadian law. A non-sentient dead corpse has more rights under Canadian law than a child just prior to being born, or at any point prior to being born. If I'll use Aunt Edna For if you've seen any of the National Lampoon movies, you might have seen Vacation. If your dear old Aunt Edna passes away, you can't just roll her body up into a carpet and then throw it into a landfill. You would be, if caught, you would be guilty of committing an indecent act, an indignified act to a human body, even though it's a dead body. That is a criminal offense under Canada's criminal code, and an individual could be subject to up to 5 years, the sentence is not to exceed 5 years. And so it does have an impact. It does matter. In Hamilton, a number of years ago, we're probably going back 10 years or so, I used to write a blog called Canadian Soapbox. You can find it on Blogspot. Gordy Canuck, but Canuck is spelled C-A-N-U-C-K, not C-A-N-U-C-K, but I got rid of the second C. So Gordy Canuck, C-A-N-U-K. What happened? So I wrote a number of blogs on this, and back like in 2008, 2009, and there was a case in Hamilton where a landlord, an apartment had been vacated, and the landlord came in to do their survey, whatever, check and make sure everything's okay. And on the balcony, they found in a garbage bag a dead, I'll use the term fetus baby. They couldn't determine whether the child had been born alive or not. Impossible to know. Obviously, in the garbage bag, the remains were dead. And nothing could come of it. No charges were laid, nothing, because that it couldn't be determined whether that child had been born alive or not. And it's only if the child is born alive that the child has recognition under Canadian law. Getting back to committing an dignified or act to a human body, if that had been an individual who had been alive and died, and someone just threw a body into a garbage bag or something and left it on a balcony and vacated an apartment, then there could be that individual could be subject to criminal prosecution under the Criminal Code of Canada for committing an undignified act towards a human body, because that's a human body. But the fetus baby they found isn't human unless you can prove that the child had been born alive. There was another case where police found a storage locker with a number of dead, lifeless fetus babies, and they unable to determine whether or not the children had been born alive or not. Not from a legal standpoint, nothing could be done. Obviously, I think the person involved in that probably was suffering from some obvious mental health issues, and I would pray that they got some help. But I think it's a debate worth having. I think it's a discussion worth having. I don't like it when discussion is dominated by the extremes. And that's the situation we have in Canada right now. The entire abortion debate is dominated. And right now, the pro-choice side is 100% completely happy because there are absolutely zero restrictions on abortion in Canada at all. None. Zero. The United States, in overturning Roe v. Wade, have simply joined the rest of the world. If you go to Sweden, Australia, Italy, France, Norway, the Netherlands, pick a country. Doesn't matter. There are only 4 countries in the world where abortion is legal at any time for any reason. Canada is obviously one. The other 3 are China, Vietnam, and North Korea. Every other country in the world, restrictions might kick in at 14 weeks, at 18 weeks, at 20 weeks. But every country has some restrictions. And now the United States, with Roe v. Wade having been overturned, as I understand it, speaking as a non-lawyer, as I understand it now, any law that's put forward by a state, the constitutionality of that law can't be challenged on the basis of Roe v. Wade. So Canada, completely different situation, because we have absolutely, there's nothing constitutional to question, because we have no law. We had a law up until, I forget what year, it was in the early 90s. Brian Mulroney was the Prime Minister of Canada. Dr. Henry Morgentaler had opened up clinics in, I know in Toronto, and I believe in Montreal as well. And he was performing elective abortions for a fee, because it wasn't funded by OHIP or by our government-funded medical system. And so he was performing them, and he was put in jail for it. Now, what's interesting is, you can look this up. There's a quote attributed to, in numerous publications, attributed to Dr. Morgentaler, where he spoke out against late-term abortion. He said that he had an ethical issue with performing an abortion after a certain number of weeks. It might have been 24, it might have been 26, whatever the number was. He said, after that date, I have an issue with performing an abortion. We want to abort a fetus before it becomes a baby. So even Henry Morgentaler, who is sainted among the pro-choice crowd, he had a line in the sand where he said, at a certain point, that's a human being, that's a baby. And he had ethical issues with performing late-term abortions. And this is something that does happen in Canada. More recently, within the last 5-6 years, in the province of Quebec again, there was an issue where the province, the Quebec Health Ministry, or in Ontario we call it OHIP, Ontario Hospital Insurance Program. I used to live in Quebec, but I forget what their acronym is for their health department. I wish I could remember, I'm trying, but leave it. They were, with late-term abortions, in some cases, they were sending them down to a border state, to the United States, one of the northern states that borders the province of Quebec. I think it might have been Vermont, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But at any rate, because of the changing legal climate in the United States, again, legal is one thing, funding is, or access is another. And the clinic that Quebec had been sending women to have late-term abortions at, it closed for whatever reason. And so that option wasn't available. And there was a quote in mainstream papers where a member of the Quebec Legislative Assembly, the National Assembly as they call it, l'Assemblée nationale, and the individual was saying that choice is choice is choice. And while late-term abortions may be regrettable, they are perfectly legal, and the government has an obligation to fund them. And so it's a question of, what are they going to do now that one particular clinic, where, and it's not a large number, I think it was like a dozen or so per year, late-term abortions would be performed. And I'm getting back to the point where people say, well, it happens so rarely, why bother legislating it? Well, how committing an undignified or act toward a dead human body, that's incredibly rare too. Doesn't, I can't remember the last time I heard about someone committing an undignified act to a dead human body. It does happen. It's very rare, and yet it's codified in the Canadian Criminal Code. But so rare, for me, doesn't come into the equation. And again, every country in the world has some restrictions. I mean, my own personal view, is that regardless of at what point in pregnancy it is, if it's ever a question between the child's life and the mother's life, that the mother's life takes precedence. Just my own personal view. And I know there are some who disagree with that. They will say that, and this is the extreme on the other side of the equation, the extreme pro-life side will say an abortion should never, never, never take place, regardless of whatever reason, even if the mother's life is threatened by continuing the pregnancy. They will say that even if it's a 12, 13-year-old child who's been sexually violated by someone, that child should be forced to carry the baby to term. I don't agree with that. And I tend to think that I'm in the majority on that in that regard. I know that Canada, predominantly, we are very much pro-choice. But at the same time, pro-choice to a point. Most Canadians, I do believe, are opposed to late-term abortions when there's no threat whatsoever to the mother carrying the child. Pro-choice up to, in the first trimester, but, once you get, I believe fetal viability is referred to as being somewhere around the 24-week mark, meaning the child has the ability to live autonomous of the mother if given the chance. So again, very contentious issue, but I'm not shy. No one's chimed in, so I'm going to leave it there. But I think, as I say, I think it's a discussion worth having. And I know that the extremists on the pro-choice side don't want the discussion to take place because they're happy with everything that's going on. And they're happy that probably 90+% of the Canadian population isn't aware that there are zero laws. Everything is anytime, any reason. And it is a publicly funded procedure. In Canada, we have public health. Our tax dollars are what fund the healthcare system. And so it's a reasonable discussion to have, in my view, absolutely, even though a certain element of the population would rather shut it down. Editorial comment on my own part, I find it's an extreme element of the population who wants to shut down debate. I consider it fascist to shut down reasonable and to say that topic is not allowed to be discussed. It's settled. No, not in a democratic country. Yeah, that may fly in a fascist country, but in a liberal democratic country like Canada, I'm sorry. We are allowed to discuss these issues, even if they are uncomfortable, even if they are contentious. Those are the things which most need discussing. And I'm being asked by Risky Opinions if I am a Canadian. Yes, I am a Canadian. Canadian born, Canadian bred. Although I will qualify that by saying that when I was 6 months old, we moved from Canada to the United States, and I spent 10 of my first 12 years growing up in New York, New Jersey, and Oregon. But I'm 50, I'm going to be 56 soon. And so all but 10 of those years born in Canada and 45 odd years living in Canada. Are you a Canadian? Risky Opinions? I don't even know if you're still watching, but Risky Opinions is saying I have no business talking about Roe versus Wade. I made the point at the start of the video, you may not have seen it, is that the impact it is having on Canada is that it is causing Canadians to discuss abortion. And Americans, I agree. It's your business, it's your country, it's your laws. What it's the spillover that's happening into Canada is it's causing us to have discussions in our own country. And in Canada, abortion is legal at any time for any reason. There's no laws on it anywhere. in the books in Canada. I mentioned this at the start, and because there's so much discussion of Roe v. Wade coming out of the United States, it's spilled over into Canada, and now abortion is being discussed up here in our situation. That in Canada, abortion's allowed during the full 9 months of pregnancy for any reason whatsoever, and it's funded by the government as well. And so the pro-choice side of the equation does not like the fact that Canadians are now talking about abortion within the context of Canada. They would rather the debate be quiet because they're happy they've got everything they want. And it's having spent 10 years growing up in the U.S. and I have visited often. I know it's every bit as contentious down south of the 49th parallel as it is here north of it, and maybe more so in the United States. And as I understand it, in the United States, it's at the state level that regulations are put in place. My former state, where I spent a number of years growing up, kindergarten to grade 4, when I was talking like a New North Jersey, where you talk like you're from Brooklyn, they have their governor or some of their state legislatures have said that they will absolutely maintain a woman's right to an abortion, that their laws will, and they'll welcome women from other states to come in. I mean, it's going to be interesting to watch as a spectator. But you're right, Canadians have no business chiming in and talking about it. I made the point again earlier in the video that all that's happening in the United States right now is that and risky business is saying, oh, we are happy you spend some time on here on your country, but American politics is American politics. The one thing, like I'll go global for a second and just comment that every country in the world, except for Canada, North Korea, China, and Vietnam, every country in the world has some laws respecting abortion. Australia, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, you name it. Any country in the world except those 4, Canada and the other 3 communist countries. So all that's happened is, in my view, is that the United States has basically joined the global community. Canada hasn't. Canada's sticking with North Korea, China, and Vietnam. The United States has joined in with the rest of the world and allowing laws to be put on the books with respect to abortion. Canada, you can't. Because we had a law back in the 90s, and as I understand it, if a woman wanted to have an abortion, she had to go before a panel at a hospital, and then they would determine whether or not the reasons were justified, and then it would be approved or denied based on this panel. And Henry Morgentaler, as I was saying, he opened up clinics in Montreal, he opened up a clinic in Toronto, and then he was put in jail, and he challenged the constitutionality of Canada's abortion law that existed at that time. And our Supreme Court, the Supreme Court of Canada, ruled that the law as written back then, that it was unconstitutional, that it violated a woman's right to something that's enshrined in our Constitution about security of the person. And so the law was struck down. Our Supreme Court then turned to Parliament, and you need to write a new law, one that will pass constitutional muster, one that will not violate the Constitution in terms of a person's right to security of the person. And the Mulroney government had a law written, and it was slated to be debated in the House of Commons, which is like your House of Representatives or Senate. It's like your Congress. So it was slated to be debated, and then a snap election was called, and it basically died. And abortion is sometimes called in politics here in Canada, and it's probably likewise in much of the world, is called the third rail of politics. Don't touch it, because you're going to offend a significant portion of the population no matter what you say. In Canada, just about every politician will say that they are pro-choice, but not define what that means. Oh, I'm pro-choice on abortion is what all the politicians say, but they will never define what that means. They will never say, does that mean you're pro-choice in the 9th month, days before the child is due to be born? Does that mean pro-choice if the child is going to be a girl and a boy's desired? Are you in favor of that choice? They just make a blanket statement, I'm pro-choice, and they leave it there. So anyway, I've gone on for just over 30 minutes. And there are 2 people watching. Risky Opinions is one. Sounds like that's a good username, because I consider my own just expressing opinions in today's world is risky, because you're always going to offend somebody. And unfortunately, it's a sad testament to the way the world has gone that we can't talk about in a mature, reasonable fashion. We cannot talk about contentious issues anymore. If this was an open forum, if there are people here, I'd probably be getting yelled at and shouted out and attempted to be canceled. I'm an old white guy, so I'm not allowed to express an opinion on anything anymore. Anyway, God bless. Talk to you later. Thanks for watching Risky Business, or Risky Opinions, rather. And we'll talk to you later. See what issues come up. Night now.